Good evening from London. My name is David. I'm delighted to know I'm alcoholic. You're all very welcome to this history meeting on a Friday, the 3rd of the 5th, 2024. We've got Tom Finnegan with us. Tom is going to be doing a presentation for us tonight on Sam Shoemaker. Delighted Tom to tell you more about it as we go over to him. But first, we're going to just put up on the screen for you. If you'd like to unmute yourselves, please do. We're going to share the first one. I'm going to do first. God, please help me to set aside first, and then we'll go over to the other one. So please unmute and we say, God, please
help me to set aside everything I think I know.
With an open mind for a new
understanding.
Amen. And for those of us of the other persuasion, if you'd like to just do the serenity statement, may I seek the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we're just going to have a few moments silence, regardless of what side of the fence we sit on, to think of the alcoholics, because that's our primary purpose, is to stay sober and help another alcoholic to achieve sobriety. And we're thinking of the family members as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Great stuff. Bill Sheberg has built up Tom Finnegan for us last Sunday at Writing the Big Book meeting. He said, there's a man you've got to listen to is Tom Finnegan. So this is over to you, Tom Finnegan. I'm excited. We're going to learn more about the Calvary mission, I believe. Thank you, Tom.
All right. Well, thank you, David. I will get back to my screen share, I hope. Hang on. All right, are you seeing
from beginning? If you go over to the top left, Tom, from beginning, and that's it, sir. Yeah, got it. Click on that one, and it should bring you straight there. You go.
All righty, thank you all. So thanks again, David. I am Tom Finnegan. I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is January 19th, 2005. It's not my first sobriety date. I first was 12-stepped in. I was living in Baltimore, but got 12-stepped into a meeting I came to out of a blackout in New York City, and was 12-stepped in. That was in 1984. My first sponsor, I moved back to Baltimore, but my first sponsor had about 40 years of sobriety. In 84, but he was drunk for a little bit, so he was really early on. And did I ask him one piece of history, what it was like in New York AA, in the late 40s and 50s? I didn't at all. So then, later on, I sort of kicked myself as I started getting involved in AA history. Anyway, I have a sponsor. I'm fortunate enough to sponsor other people. My home group is the Basic Text Group in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So anyway, it's a little bit of my background. I got involved in history. I was in a bad spot. I was about a year sober coming back in this time around. I was in a bad spot, and I ended up flying out to LA. I was in the middle of a lawsuit, and the IRS had a permanent office in our building, and I just had trouble all over the place, at home, at work, etc. And had a business meeting out in LA. So my flight landed. I ran to dinner, and I had dinner with this sort of powerful woman who was interested in her wine, and I was miserable. I was very close to picking up a drink and joining her for that. I was able to leave that dinner meeting and make it over to the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag meeting, but I was late. And in that meeting, everybody they pour outside and they listen into the meeting through the windows. And I was sitting there, and in walks a gentleman, and he just looked over at me, pointed at me, and just said, "You come over here." And I got up and I went over to him, And he just like, you look miserable. And I just looked at him. I said, I feel miserable. I'm like, I am going to drink. And he said, well, let's go in and have a coffee and tell me about it. And so we started talking, and I said, I just, since I came back in, they snuck in meditation. Do you know anything about prayer and meditation? And he said, yeah, I happen to know a little bit about prayer and meditation. And the person I had run into was J.S. He now lives in Sedona. Many of you may have heard of him or know of him, but he is sort of a meditation guru, history nut. And so anyway, I said, well, what did they do in the early days? And that's sort of where my journey got started, was working with Jay, told me a little bit about the Oxford group, told me a little bit about what they did in the early days and what he's doing today, probably more importantly, to stay away from a drink and improve his prayer life, prayer and meditation. And so I started listening to him and taking some of his suggestions. But also he pointed me in a lot of different directions. And one thing led to another, which led to another, which led to another, which has led me to this meeting here tonight. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey, how I got started on some of this stuff and where my travels have taken me along the way. And we'll go from there. So anyway, the talk for this is Sam Shoemaker's Life-Changing Ministry, Calvary Mission, and the missions and people that preceded the Calvary mission. So what led up to that, and the early pre-AA messengers, because there were a lot. And then for those who know Shoemaker, he wrote the poem, I Stand by the Door. And so on my little business card, I call myself the doorman. I'll hide this. The findings are just based on my research. I have pulled in some other people's material, but I try to use just all my own. Every once in a while, there's something that I'll find that I'll pull in. And all right, so is this in the way, David?
No, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah, I can see influence. I think everyone else can see it as well.
Okay. I'm just going to move it for myself then out of the way. Oops. All right. So this is who carried the message to Ebby. How could they transmit what they, what they could pass on? Who's the Oxford group? And then just some other people that influenced Bill and the beginning. So it begins with William James. And I, in our book, there are a couple things that the little spiritual breadcrumbs, if you will. But the only outside book that's referenced in our big book is William James, and it just says the distinguished American psychologist William James in his book Varieties of Religious Experience indicates a multitude of ways in which men have discovered God. So that was sort of one of the breadcrumbs, and I said, well, I wonder what was in there if I'm lacking in my spiritual recovery. What was it in there? What was so important in that book that Bill felt like he needed to put it in? There's a solution. And then in AA Comes of Age, Bill also mentions it was Ebby, I think, you brought me a copy of James's Variety of Religious Experience. So I pulled the copy of Varieties, and in there, in Conversions, in the copy that I have, it's on page 198. But on Tuesday evening, I sat in a saloon in Harlem. A homeless friendless dying drunkard. I'd pawned or sold everything that would bring me a drink. I could not sleep unless I was dead drunk. Although up to that moment my soul had been filled with indescribable gloom, I felt the glorious feeling of the noonday sun shone into my heart. Felt I was a free man. And from that moment till this, I've never wanted to drink a whiskey nor seen enough money to make me take one. It isn't the last drink that hurts a man, nor the fourth or fifth, but the first drink. And that's what ruins a man. So that book that James referred to is out of Down in Water Street. And Down in Water Street is a delightful book. I'm not sure if people have read it or have had the opportunity to see it. But it is S.H. Hadley's story. It describes his life, what he was like, what happened, and then what he's like now. And in the back there are a number of stories, and I'll show a couple here in a second. But he ended up being the superintendent of the Jerry McAuley mission. Jerry McAuley was a self-proclaimed river thief and drunkard. He spent a lot of time up in Sing Sing prison in New York. He got out. He had a spiritual experience in prison, came out, and then with some help with some benefactors, started the McAuley mission down on Water Street. It was underneath at the time underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. And they had a very successful mission down there. Here you can see sort of the bread lines for the men lining up at the mission. And then the interior of the Water Street mission looks a lot like a lot of the AA clubhouses where I got sober in Baltimore. Lots of slogans on the wall, just rows of chairs, and the podium up front. The table of contents are down in Water Street, so there talks a little bit about Jerry, the first rescue mission, S.H. Hadley's call to Water Street, his life. It's I'll say decidedly Christian in its bringing, as were many of the early missions. Bringing my brother to Jesus is a story about Henry Harrison Hadley. You might think Harry Hadley we heard of later on. It actually, S.H. Hadley's son was Harry Hadley, who later became the superintendent of the Calvary mission, where Bill and Alec the Finns stumbled in. But he was raised by Hopkins Hadley, Samuel Hopkins Hadley, Hop as they called him, his brother. So alcoholism ran heavily in the Hadley family. And S.H. Hadley was not well enough to raise some of, anyway, his children. And Harry Hadley was raised by his uncle. And there's just a bunch of little small worlds that come through there. So it tells a little bit about, what they were like, what happened. And then some of these others, the Refuge of the Crooks, Old Uncle Rube, Poor Pop Lloyd, these are stories of other people in the book. So it shows the history of the recovery in the mission, how they got sober, how these men got sober in the missions. And then the experiences that they have afterwards. So it's laid out a lot like our big book, sort of absent the solutions, our program of action. But it does have, a lot of similarities to it. And I always thought that was a pretty cool book. But this is the book that William James read and then pulled out of that about the conversions. The story. The other missionary influence was the Salvation Army. Started over in London in 1865. In 1878, it changed its name from Christian Mission to the Salvation Army, and then it took off. And people began to leave their past behind and lead a new life. So for those in London who are interested, there's some really interesting books by Hugh Redwood, God in the Slums and God in the Shadows. It talks a lot about the missions of East London. Apparently East London is a rough spot. The other interesting person that plays in is he's a Scotland guy, but Henry Drummond. Henry Drummond is one of my favorites. In Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, he'd suggest in his spiritual journey that when newcomers, he would say, give them a copy of The Greatest Thing in the World, have them read it every day, and in 30 days they'll be changed. There's a lot that Henry Drummond put out there that ended up in the Oxford group message, which then ended up in our AA message. He was a trained scientist and a theologian. He felt like both science and religion could coexist. And he introduced this idea of lay therapy in his essay on spiritual diagnosis. It's not a finished essay, but it is a delightful essay, and it's in one of his books. I believe The Ideal World. I think I have it over there. And the other one other book that he's written, they're addresses than books, even The Greatest Thing in the World. The other one is Pax Vobiscum. Peace be with you. It's about serenity. Like I can read that essay, that sermon, that talk that he gives, and it brings, I can just see a lot of our serenity in there. So Drummond, would be Dwight Moody's right-hand man. When he and Ira Sankey were going around in the great missions evangelizing, they would go over to Europe quite a bit. And then they would have in Northfield, Massachusetts, these big missions, and lots of the YMCAs throughout the world would come to these retreats, week-long retreats, sometimes 2-week-long retreats at the Northfield boys' school, actually boys and girls school, but boys' school at the time. And so here's a big sort of conference session that they were having. This guy on the right, lower right, is S.H. Hadley. And then if you look in the picture to the left, to the lower left, the far left person in the first row, that's Henry Drummond, and right behind him is S.H. Hadley. So these would spend time together up at Northfield. And we'll see later there's evidence that Shoemaker was there, Robert Speer was there. Speer is the originator of the Four Absolutes that ended up in the Oxford group. He wrote that in a book, The Principles of Jesus. And that book is a really difficult book to read, I think. But those principles are in that book that were then pulled into a lot of the Oxford group way of life. But in these sessions, a lot of the sort of circuit speakers of the time would come and would speak there. They would have the summer conference. The speakers, as I mentioned, S.H. Hadley, Drummond, Speer, F.B. Meyer, Shoemaker, Fosdick, John Goff, who was a big-time temperance speaker in the early days, Rufus Jones, etc. I know Frank Buchman went there in 1901. That's about the time that S.H. Hadley was going there, but that would have been after Drummond passed away. So I don't know if Buchman went earlier than that. And I saw in the rolls that Shoemaker was there in 1911. I don't know. Bob was active in his early youth in YMCA from Vermont. But I just don't know if Bob Smith went there. I have not seen that evidence. And then they had sort of the big speakers, and then they would have these breakout sessions. So the lower right, you can see the picture of Round Top, where they would do the speakers on the hill and people would come around. So those are the outdoor speakers. And then the upper left, if you can see all the tents that were around the edge of the field. So a lot of people would camp out. The local YMCA chapters would come. And then the Bill Bailey home, those were the drunks, or one of the tents of the drunks, the Bill Bailey home. So the Hadleys, as I mentioned earlier, the Hadleys were a family of drunks. Those Irish Catholics like myself, we know how alcoholism runs in our family. Some of my family has died of alcoholism, some have recovered, and then there's just a few that are going to go either direction. Anyway, S.H. Hadley on the left, Henry Harrison Hadley, and then on the right is Harry Hadley. He was S.H. Hadley's son, but raised by Henry Hadley and named after his uncle Henry Hadley. So it's a bit confusing, but that's where it is. So the Hadleys' work. So this is Harrison Hadley's work, or Henry Hadley's work. It began slowly. So again, and I just found recently a book, The Blue Badge of Courage, which is H.H. Hadley's autobiography. I'm not quite done with it yet. I stumbled across it actually, and it is a delightful read. And I learned a lot about S.H. Hadley and Henry Hadley's. They grew up in Ohio and how they grew up and their just life before. They were big gamblers. It was also a big gambling family, and how they wandered around in an alcoholic and gambling way, and then found hope in these missions. S.H. Hadley first in the Macaulay mission, and then his example helped his brother get in, and then later after S.H. died, Harry Hadley came in. But Henry, after his conversion at Water Street Mission, he was the superintendent of Avenue A Mission, and then called on to lead St. Bartholomew's Mission, which is financed by Cornelius Vanderbilt. And ultimately, before his passing, he started about 60 missions. So after he left St. Bart's is in New York City. Avenue A and St. Bart's are both in New York City. After he left St. Bart's, he created the Christian Army or something, which then went out and basically built a bunch of missions, and they ended up creating about 60 of them. But before he finally got sober, if you will, or had his conversion experience, he tried to create this abstinence society for working men. And it was, one of these, the Red Pledge to refrain from all intoxicating beverages for a period of a year. The second, or the White Pledge, is taken not to drink during business hours. The third, et cetera, et cetera. And they was devising all these schemes to try not to drink with other businessmen. And all those experiments failed miserably until he was converted down at Macaulay's Mission with his brother. After S.H. Hadley passed away, Harry Hadley, so it says Henry here, but this is Harry Hadley, went on with this Ted Mercer, and they went on these mission trips, going around the country basically as circuit speakers, and they would go around and tell their stories, their experience, strength, and hope about how they found God, and now how they're living a different life. He was, you can just see some of this down in here. He was the superintendent of the Open Door Rescue Mission on Hudson Street for a little while. When the prohibition was passed, they actually closed down the Open Door Rescue Mission, thinking that with prohibition laws being passed, that they would no longer need rescue missions. And Harry Hadley saw the fallacy of that, but couldn't quite see that. So I'm going to read just a couple of things before I get into the Oxford group. The Harry Hadley. Well, actually, I'll get to it in a second. Mercer and Hadley came to Calvary Episcopal Church 5 years before Shoemaker was there. And they spoke at they had one of these revival sort of mission talks. Their talks were associated with the Episcopal churches. And so Hadley was exposed prior to Shoemaker arriving of the old Calvary mission. They did their preaching in the main church, but it was I think just a bit of a premonition of things to come. So the Oxford group, there's actually a great book. I'm not starting in the beginning of this, but there's a great book. What is the Oxford group? It was published in 1933. And then here's some things that come out of it. But to be spiritually reborn and live in a state with these 4 points are the guides to God and life. Sharing our sins and temptations with another Christian life. Surrender of our life past, present, and future to God's keeping and direction. Restitution and listening and relying on God's guidance. For those familiar with the Oxford group, you've probably seen some of this before. The Oxford group was founded by this Frank Buchman and Sam Shoemaker. It was originated at a Keswick chapel in 1908. I love the story, and I know it's been told here before, of Penn State with Dr. Mott, Blair Buck, and Bill Pickle. I was able to find actually when Bill Pickle passed away in the Calvary Evangel, the Evangel is the newsletter, if you will, of the Calvary Church. it was a theft of a barrel of pickles, which gave Gilliland the nickname by which he became known all over the world. Bill Pickle is the title of chapter 13 of For Sinners Only by A.J. Russell, which is a terrific Oxford Group book for those who want to learn more about the Oxford Group. And they're reprints that you can buy pretty cheaply. But they did in June of 1939, when Bill Pickle passed on, he was known enough for them to publish his obituary in the Calvary Evangel in Shoemaker's Church there in New York. During the first house party in China, a couple of bishops asked Bookman to see their sons. Shoemaker himself was on that trip in 1918 and was struggling to convert his man, as they used to do in the Oxford Group. And after talking with Bookman, it was clear that there was something that was blocking him off from his higher power. And as he shed that, he was able to win his man. And Shoemaker became converted on January 19th, 1918. And then he would travel with them. So when Shoemaker was actually in it was in 1924, Shoemaker was traveling with Bookman when he got the call from the vestry of Calvary Church. And it was at that time that that he prayed about, and should he go. And I always thought that Shoemaker was at Calvary. I guess I didn't realize he was traveling already with Bookman before he got that call. The absolutes, honesty, purity, and selfishness and love I mentioned came from Robert Speer. And the 5 C's: confidence, conviction, confession, conversion, and continuance. And then this I throw in because I do this talk for a lot of people that are not involved too much with the history. So I just kind of point them back to some breadcrumbs in our AA material where they can see some of this work. Here's some quotes from Shoemaker in some of the books. Some of these are probably familiar for you, but Confident Faith, Conversion of the Church, other concepts like Act as If, 3 Levels of Life, on fellowship, what the church can learn from Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a number of things that Shoemaker has said over the years that have influenced our program. Here's the church in Calvary House. So this is on Park Avenue and 21st, the Gramercy Park in New York City. And then the mission. So the mission actually, as we know it or hear about it in AA, we think about the mission. The mission was actually originally founded in the 1800s. It was you can see several of these buildings in the middle, right to the right above of this picture of Hadley, just to the upper right of that. You can see the Calvary Chapel, but flanking the Calvary Chapel is the Olive Tree Inn. There's a Boys and Girls Club there. They founded a girls friendly society, the Boys Club, with a printing press and gymnasium in 1888, a coffee house where a cup of tea and coffee or cocoa cost 2 cents, and a game of billiards 2 cents. In 1890, the kitchen garden. And then this was an interesting piece that I thought, the Brotherhood of St. John and the Knights of Temperance. And I had never heard of the Knights of Temperance. So in 1887, there was this thing that kind of ran through. It was run through the Episcopal Church, but it was the temperance movement within the Episcopal Church, interestingly enough. And so they had an offshoot or an office there. And it's my latest thing that I'm going to now go try to learn more about, frankly. But it had the Olive Tree Inn with beds for more than 400 people. And then there were other Paris organizations. All of this, though, it was called the Galilee Mission at the time. It in 1902 shut down, and they shut down the Calvary Chapel. And the decision was, it was taking the people that would go to the Calvary Chapel were being taken away from the main church, and they shouldn't have two classes of services. They turned it over to the Salvation Army. Difficult as rescue work always proves, for the ordinary clergyman, it is hopelessly depressing. Until the church can furnish some order sufficiently numerous and adequately devoted, the Salvation Army is the best agent for the work at Galilee the present rector has found. So they shut down the Calvary mission, and it stayed shut down until later, when Harry Hadley had that famous meeting with Sam Shoemaker to get it back going. So in the meantime, Harry and Ted Mercer came to give their sort of traveling mission circuit speaker talk to the Calvary Church, and then they came back. They came back to do that, and that story is the first week in November 1920. A mission was conducted by Ted Mercer and Harry Hadley, the same Harry who a little more than 5 years later was to take up the superintendency of Calvary Mission. These two laymen were assisted by Frank Dean, brought a message to the people on behalf of the nationwide campaign. These three men have had a deep spiritual experience and are now living witness to the power of a loving God. And so that's how it was reported in the Calvary Evangel in 1920. And then Shoemaker writes, in the late summer of 1924, he was with my friend Frank Buchman and 5 others for an extended journey through the Near East and India, working largely in universities and mission centers. The 6 of us had all found, through Dr. Buchman, a deeper spiritual experience and had begun to learn how to share it with other people. What we all needed at the time was knowledge of how to function in unison and as a team, how to work continuously together under God's direction. The true object of that journey was our own training, and that we might learn the forgotten art of modern Christendom, the art of living and working unitedly in fellowship with others. And so there's a little bit about him, how he came to be with that. And then I want to read something about, and this is actually from Hadley's memorial issue. So Harry Hadley in his obituary in the Calvary Evangel, Shoemaker takes him through. He was born in Brooklyn on May 18th, 1875, before the conversion of his father, S.H. Hadley, who was later to become one of the greatest forces in rescue work history. He was named for an uncle, Colonel Hadley, who was also famous of that kind of work, so that his early life was sinful. Although his early life was sinful and godless, Harry Hadley was born in the purple of a true apostolic succession in mission work. For years, his father was superintendent of the well-known Water Street Mission with Jerry McCauley. Harry cared for none of these things, was interested in fine clothes, gambling, drink, and fast company, supporting himself by a chain of slot machines. So he sort of sounded like one of our guys too. So he had a hard, and obviously had a hard life. And then as he recovered at the Water Street Mission, he then went on this traveling circuit. It took a toll on his family. And he was, this meant continuous separation from his family except for brief periods, and he began to feel the rightness of taking up local work again. So he was traveling, he was away from his wife and kids. It was starting to wear on him. He had gone in 1920 to Calvary Church. There was an empty chapel nearby in the Gas House District. There was an obvious need. There was an obvious location. The problem was there was a new rector at Calvary Church who only had 6 months at the new parish. He was led down into 23rd Street and prayed at the doors of the hall at 346 might open for rescue work. At the same time, when this is Sam Shoemaker, was praying that the right man might be found so that we could begin mission work in the Gas House District. He always believed that God's guiding hand was in the meeting which brought us together, and I have believed it likewise. So there's a little bit of just backdrop as how Sam found Harry, Harry found Sam, and they ended up taking on the rescue work, the mission work influence. That's a little bit of the backdrop about the Calvary Mission, and they still had the olive tree in back there. Here's kind of a grainy picture of a typical meeting. So when we read about Bill stumbling into the mission with Alec the Finn, this is what it looked like. Here the men sitting in rows, listening to people witness their story, and then they would call people up at the end to give their life over to God. Now, the Oxford group meetings, this is the Tuesday night or Thursday night businessmen's meeting. These are the different, obviously, than our mission friends around the corner. The Oxford group meetings, the people there were probably just as spiritually armed, but definitely better dressed, and they were coming for a message as well. Sam Shoemaker demanded as one of his criteria for accepting the position as rector that the vestry be involved with personal work. And so he would pull in members from either the vestry or members from the businessmen's team to help with particular issues. And some of those people were people like Bud Firestone, Vic Kitchen, Charlie Clapp, Roland Hazard, Shep Cornell. Some of these folks to the right are also over at the mission. So Tex Francisco, he ended up becoming the superintendent of the mission. Fred Hogan, Spoons Costello. So there's just a number of people that were either in the Oxford group meetings or in the mission. But all of these folks were messengers that passed the message to another, who passed the message to another, who ultimately passed it to Ebby and Bill. And we'll talk about just a couple of their different stories as we go through. All right, so Shoemaker, there are some direct examples where Shoemaker delivered the message to, we know he did it on the train to Bud Firestone. I suspect, although I haven't seen where it's written or how it came about, but he probably had the same conversation with Shep Cornell. And then he would send Shep Cornell out to do some of the legwork. Shoemaker believed you can't keep a message if you don't give it away. And so off they went. So, when Roland and Sebra, Shep, they were his foot soldiers for helping people who had the drink problem. And they would either do it directly through the Oxford group, or they'd send them over to the mission, or some combination of both. And, when Ebby visited Bill, Ebby was only sober, a month or two when he was, when they sent him over to see his friend Bill, his childhood friend Bill. Bill stumbled into the mission with Alec the Finn in December of 34, and there's correspondence already in January of 35 where Shoemaker sends Bill a letter saying, "Thanks for your help with Fred B." I don't know whatever happened with Fred B, but, he was already sending Bill out. And as Bill mentioned later on that, there were many attempts, but no one stayed sober. Lois said, "Yes, but you have, Bill." So there are a lot of these little breadcrumbs of where they were. One person that got sober in the Oxford group was Vic Kitchen. He wrote this book, I Was a Pagan. It is a delightful book. In I Was a Pagan, it talks about his sort of what he was like, what happened, and how he's passing the message on. But he's got his own version of the third step in his book. I surrender thee my entire life, O God. I've made a mess of it, trying to run it myself. You take it, the whole thing, and run it for me according to your will and plan. It's a great book. It's also one you can find free. But here is Kitchen's version. They called it Truth, but his version of the force of an inventory. What I liked most myself, liquor, anything which gives me pleasure, to be left largely to myself. It's just kind of fun to read this stuff, and go through that. Another one, this is also from London, Discipline for Life-Changing Service, H. Dixon Smith. Here is his version of an inventory. Clearly defined desires to hurt, desire to kill, desire to wound, desire to, camouflage desires, tale bearing, accusation. And the copy of the book that I happened to buy, someone has checked off a bunch of these already. So I thought that was kind of fun. There's this Harold Begbie. He wrote Twice Born Men. Just some of these, I just felt all of a sudden determined to find God, determined, he repeated with energy astonishing in his broken and hopeless creature of alcoholism. And he went on while kneeling. While I was praying, I felt the Spirit of God come upon me. I said, "Oh God, make me like Joe." And while I prayed, I felt the Spirit come upon me, and I knew I could become like Joe. I knew I'm saved. Stephen Foote, in his book, Life Began Yesterday. For the rest of my life, I surrender everything I have to God for him to use. I challenge my thoughts and actions by God's standards, and I will ask God to show me his purpose for my life and claim from him the power to carry that purpose out. That sounds a lot like our 11th step, doesn't it? So a lot of this stuff that I stumbled across has been really pretty interesting. Just sort of seeing that the foundation. This was the material that these messengers got, which is why it was so interesting to me. You can see the twice born men, a little bit about the prefix, and then these are just stories of people and their spiritual experiences. And then, here 9, the Virginian, that's the story of Sam Shoemaker. For Sinners Only and the Venture of Belief, you can't read these books and not see our program jump out at us. In the book list of the Calvary Evangel, here it's just a roster of books. Many of them you can find reprints. Some of them you can't. But they're great. One of the ones I love, Seeking and Finding, by this Macmillan. Macmillan was Australian. And I think the first chapter of that book is First Things First. But I love that book. And then The Big Bender, Charlie Clapp. So Charlie Clapp got sober in the Oxford group before Bill, and he wrote this book, The Big Bender. He then wrote, after he decided that he could drink again, Drunks Are Square Pegs, and that experiment didn't work. And then he wrote Drinking's Not the Problem. And I know a lot of people just kind of look down and be like, well, it's the Oxford group. They don't know how to keep people sober. There are a lot of examples of a lot of sober people. But the interesting thing, in 1946, in between some of these books, here in January 1942 in my book. So this is in the Grapevine. So Charlie had joined AA. And this book contained a fairly complete story of my struggles, defeats, and victories as an alcoholic, in addition to some personal. So it's just interesting to see some of the two come together later on. I don't know if what his ultimate demise was, but he had a very colorful journey, and those books are delightful to read. Oh, I'll go back for a second. In The Big Bender, there's very clear evidence of the conversations he had with Sam Shoemaker, and then Shep Cornell, and he mentions them both by name. And so it describes how they brought the message to him, and how he interacted with them, in his recovery. So you can see a little bit about the Oxford group message that was delivered again to the other messengers, that then delivered it to Ebby, that then delivered it to Bill, and then delivered it to Dr. Bob. Here, up in Wheaton College in Chicago, Sam Shoemaker's diaries are there. So you can see here in 1935, he's meeting with Roland Hazard, Vic Kitchen. Here's Tex Francisco and Charlie Clapp. So he, throughout his appointment books, there are a lot of the names that we have come to learn when just going back through history. Here's a piece from the Calvary Evangel in 32. We see that Tex Francisco celebrated his second anniversary on February 9th. Clarence Shanklin's second the same night. And Harry Hadley's 26th anniversary, Fred Morgan's third. So they were celebrating their anniversaries. And, they published it in the parish newsletter. The other thing that came out during these were the trips to Louisville, Asheville, Montreal, Akron, Denver, Tahoe, etc. They would have discussion. They would do big group meetings, discussion meetings, small groups, speaker meetings, conferences, and you could see all of that. In November of 31, there is the one of the trips that were taken. Here's the Brown Palace Hotel. I guess this is Louisville. We're up in Akron, and then I think they went down to Louisville on that trip. So you can see sort of the journeys where they went on the road. This the Calvary Evangel, this High, Wide, and Handsome is Bud Firestone's story as he tells it. You know, after donning my black cap and buying the usual freshman requirements, I made my way to the registrar's office and looked over carefully the courses from which I was supposed to take. Yada, yada. It kind of goes right on. And then it, talks about, his story. Sort of straight on. Here was the trip from Denver to Denver during the Episcopal Convention and his meeting with Sam Shoemaker. Here's the article for that. Here's the a roster of some of the people that they went to at the Mayflower Hotel. This miracle in the Midwest, the names that are here on the right, this is in January of 35. So this is when, Bill had just gotten sober in the mission and he's going around, and I always wondered, how much interaction did he have with Shoemaker? Shoemaker was traveling a lot with the Oxford group. So there wasn't, as much opportunity for him. But you can see here's Roland Hazard went on the trip. Vic Kitchen went on the trip. So there's the names in the right here, on the side. They went out to, Akron. This is Cyberling's estate in the gatehouse. And then inside the gatehouse on February 10th, 1934, when the Oxford group came in early 1934, you can see the registry. So up top, the third one down, you can see Vic Kitchen, I was a pagan. So you can recognize some of the names here from that New York crew, who were in and around, when the messengers were getting sober, so that they could then have a message to bring to Bill. So the other thing I'll say, this is I wasn't quite sure where to put this in the presentation, but Carl Jung knew about the Oxford group. In a book here he published in 1938, Buchman references the Buchman movement on page 23 of this Psychology and Religion. And then he also references Henry Drummond. So Carl Jung was aware of the Oxford group and what they were doing, and how they were helping people find God. All right, so that kind of brings us around to the Shoemaker delivers the message to Hazard, Graves, and Cornell, who bailed out Ebby in his escapades, and then brought back to Bill. I'll say it just on a side note. When, my grandmother, when she passed away, she was 100 years old. And so she grew up in Albany, New York. And I asked her if she knew the Thatchers. And it was kind of fun. She knew the Ebby's older brothers, but not Ebby himself. And then she said, oh, yeah, they came from a big family. Father was the mayor of Albany, and told a couple of stories, which was kind of fun. And then Bill and Dr. Bob bring the message to Bill D. And then they got Bob busy, or, sort of straight away with Bill D., sort of the man on the bed that they talk about later on. So I'm skipping a couple of these slides a little bit beyond the scope. The interesting thing also is listening to Shoemaker's talk at the St. Louis Convention in 1955, and the talk is actually reprinted in AA Comes of Age, and so you can read his talk in AA Comes of Age. It's fun to listen to it, but I love when in that talk he meets some people on the elevator and they say, "Well, you're an alcoholic," and Shoemaker says no, and the response is, "Well, you sound like one," which is just a really big compliment for Shoemaker, because that sort of affirmation that he carried the message so that we could then repeat it back and sort of spot it when we see it. Afterwards, he wrote What the Church Has to Learn from Alcoholics Anonymous. And this was when he was now in Pittsburgh. He left Calvary Church in New York and went to Pittsburgh, which is also a fascinating chapter in what he did over in Pittsburgh with the Pittsburgh experiment and other things. But he really turned it all, sort of 360 around and said, hey, we in the early days, we may have taught some of the principles for the formation of AA, but hey, today AA can really teach the church some of the formations and how to be better at that. And then just a couple of other little fun things that I've got. This Easy Does It. There was an interesting foreword in that book from Silkworth. And he was the person in charge at the Knickerbocker Hospital at the time. So he had moved along from Towns Hospital and continued in his work. And basically the same format, but inside this book, it really describes what it was probably like inside Towns Hospital and that program of recovery. It's a harder book to find. There may be reprints of it now. It's an anonymous book, but it's the Easy Does It, the story of Mac. The Jack Alexander articles I thought were interesting. There were 3 of them. And so they're in, you can find all 3 of the different articles, but one was sort of the original, The Skeptical Journalist Comes Back, and then The Drunkard's Best Friend was the 3rd that he wrote in 1950. So we always talk about the 1941 article, but there are a couple of other articles. And this Duffy's Tavern is inside the ward at the Knickerbocker Hospital where Silkworth was working. So anyway, just kind of fun little random stuff. The other thing I'll say is we have this 24-hour-a-day book. I think you're going to do something on Richmond Walker if I saw that. I went through, so God Calling was by the 2 listeners, this devotional by 2 listeners. You probably have heard of God Calling. And Richmond Walker basically took God Calling and then wrote AA related stuff with that. So if you look at July 12th in God Calling, you can see, if you believe it is my hand that has saved you. And then July 12th on the right is 24-hour a day. Look down at the meditation for the day. If you believe God's grace has saved you, then so you can just kind of see that he just pulled these readings over and then created his. And when I got sober in the beginning, there was no daily reflections. It really was just this 24-hour a day book, and I still sort of go back to it, frankly. So that really sort of summarizes. I know probably have missed most or a lot of what I was thinking about talking about, but you got what you got. And so with that, I will stop sharing. I do have a couple of pieces I put in here just for just some sources, but a lot or my favorite. This is where I send newcomers. There's just a lot in our own literature first, and then you can start sending people out in other spots. But for this talk, I added the Episcopal Church archives. I just put this one speakers, to hear Ebby's talk out on some of the different sites is really fun. He explains what it was like in some of the early days and what have you. So anyway, with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Tom Finnegan. Please, all on mute. Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Good presentation.
Wow,
It's a
so
great
much.
presentation.
Good.
Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Brilliant stuff. So that was Tom Finnegan, early influence of the missions and Sam Shoemaker's life-changing ministry, Calvary Mission, and the early pre-AA figures who influenced Bill W. Tom, I've already getting messages to say when is he coming back to do more? He sounds like he has a lot of information. We want to get some more of your information. Please do come back, Tom. We will be in contact by email. And just before we go to the Q&A, I think Rob wants to tell us about some meetings that are coming up. Rob, are you telling us about these meetings?
I am going to tell you about the meeting. On Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, we have Writing the Big Book, and Bill Shaberg will be there for it. And it's going to be about the outline. And also on Saturday, there is a meeting of a presentation on Florence Rankin. Mm-hmm. And then Eamon has his meeting. Eamon, you want to talk about that one?
Well, it's every Sunday we have a long-timers meeting where all the speakers are 40 years plus. And this Sunday we have Barney M. from Northern Ireland, who is 50... What did I say?
49. 49. Yeah, that's 47 years, 47.
57 years. 57.
57. Oh my God, 57 years. Wow.
And then next Thursday, we are back here at 2:30 Eastern Time for Bobby B. It'll be the final chapter, I believe, Kevin Kennedy.
That's right. And Gary said he's going to bring he teased us yesterday. He was saying he was going to bring some letters and going to read out some letters from Bobby as well. So we're doing the last chapter of that. It's been very powerful, very emotionally, and as people have been using heartfelt throughout the whole lot for the last 2.5 months. It's been incredible.
I'm sorry, David. And all this information will be in the chat. If for some reason you miss it, just hit me up in the chat and ask me for it, and I will be more than happy to put it directly to yourself. And you know what? Hey, we're trying to make it easier for everybody, not more difficult.
No. Simple but not easy. Simple but not easy. We're trying to make it simple but not easy for them. Let them do the work themselves. But here we go. This is another one. If you want to get more information about the historical home of Bill and Lois Wilson, registration is now open. I'm sure you're all on the email list for that for Stepping Stones. Okay, we got Hugh H in with us, top of the Hill Group. Hello, Hugh. Nice to see you again.
Yep, nice to be here. That was an amazing presentation. I learned a lot from it. The one thing I wanted to point out or assert is that Hugh Riley is a pseudonym for Dr. Silkworth. He actually wrote that book, but just not under his own name. The preface he wrote and put his name on, but he also wrote, it's a made-up story about what it's like to be in Towns Hospital.
It's a delightful book.
It's almost certain that he wrote it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hugh. Does anyone else like to jump in there, ask a question? We have time for about, I think, 15 or 20 minutes. We're contemplating, Tom. So they'll just get to the question. Randy is quiet as well tonight. Nothing catch it. Oh, there you go. Eddie's up in Toronto. He's in the Beaches group. Eddie, we can't see you, but we know who you are.
There we go. Okay, I'm on. Okay, thanks so much, David. Tom, thanks so much. Very good presentation. Wanted to ask you, what was the name of the book where you said chapter 13 was about Bill Pickle?
Oh, I think that was for Sinners Only.
But if not, we'll put your email in the chat and they can contact you via email. Is that okay, Tom, if people contact you via email?
Yeah.
Or Eddie, I'll put the chat up.
That was for Sinners Only.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
you. Yeah. There's Bernadette. Eddie's out kicking off the Toronto group. There we go. Bernadette is jumping in. Richmond.
Eddie's my bud, and he's down in Toronto, my go-to guy. I wanted to ask Tom, I wanted to ask our speaker, how successful was the Oxford group in China?
Oh, I don't know that I know the answer to that. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I think Christian religions in general had a hard time of it after the Communist Party took over. But that was sometime after when they were over there. But it's a good question. I don't know.
I hear often, about Sam Shoemaker and his travels to China, and it just occurred to me. I wonder how he made out with that. Anyway, thank you very much, Tom.
Yeah, Jay might know. I'll ask Jay.
Yeah, they can send you an email. I think we can get that email in the chat soon, Tom. I need to send it to Rob. I think Rob might have it. I've been listening to, for the last 4 years, I've been listening to over 250 of these presentations. And tonight it just became very clear to me that we're all foot soldiers of Sam Shoemaker. I was listening to you there tonight. I was thinking, wow, I can see Patrick O'Day has been talking about this, but tonight the penny I went, wow, that's so clear now.
Yeah, I would not underestimate some of the influence that these early missions had too. A lot of what we do is modeled after the missions, and it's modeled after the Oxford group, and the two converging is really sort of what we ended up with.
I can see it, Tom. Thank you for that. As you said, it became very apparent to me tonight. I'm going to call him Bob K because he's sitting in his car there, and I think he's going to do something. Bob, you get out of the car or in the car?
Yeah, hi. So, I'm a big fan of Jerry McCauley and Water Street Mission. First, and I have a question if I don't forget later, but I want to know how old you were in 1984, because it had to be pretty damn young compared to the geezers around here. But, so I'm a fan of the mission movement. I'm disappointed that William James talked about Samuel Hopkins, but didn't tell the Jerry McCauley story, which is really interesting. But anyway, those guys, Hopkins especially, and Jerry McCauley, they had the same insight Bill Wilson had. If I want to keep this thing, I have to give it to other people. And, I find it fascinating to see things like that recur. And as my friend Patrick says so frequently, there's not new stuff. And Bill Wilson didn't claim new stuff. He called it the common property of mankind. And, he was a gleaner and took this from these guys. And anyway, thanks for the presentation. And how old were you in 1984?
So I was 18 in 1984, which is, part of my problem. You know, I took my first legal drink at the age of 31 with 13 years of sobriety. So that was a hard time. And then I really struggled to get back in. But I do agree the Jerry Macaulay is also a delight to read. Down in Water Street, it talks a little bit about Jerry Macaulay's story. But Transformed is a book that Jerry Macaulay wrote. And then there was another one that I have in my home office. And I can't quite remember the name of it, but there were a couple of books there that highlight his work. And really talk about his time in Sing Sing prison and coming out. And a lot of what he was trying to do too was when people got out of jail, they had a really rough go of it. It's hard enough today when people get out of jail to find work and find things to do. So he was very favorable to, if you were drunks and locked up, then you'd end up down at the Macaulay at the mission that he started.
And he's one of your key players as well, Bob Kay. I remember we read about him in your book, Key Players in Their History. There we go. Lola is coming. Lola, I hope I get this right. Are you in Washington or Miami?
Oh, hush up, David. Hi, Tom. I met you at the Tar Heel conference in, I guess, February, whatever time. Anywho, thank you so much for this talk. As many times as I'm on these history meetings, and as often as I've heard this, it just hit me tonight how important the missions were back in the day. My sponsor and all their cronies and all them old timers, they always talked about the missions. And cause I was a kid at the time, I really didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And furthermore, it just sounded too religious for me to even question. And it turns out, I guess the missions were what they call rehabs now without the influence of any sort of spirituality. But the missions were super important, and they talked about like the homelessness and going back to the missions and, you know, giving back to, I mean, it was just, it just all came together for me tonight, how important those missions were, and Sam Shoemaker and my sponsor knew these people. You know, I mean, I'm not that far removed from some of these people, which just surprises the hell out of me because I really wasn't planning on staying here because I didn't think I really had a problem. But thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And, you know, we have some similarities with, you know, some halfway houses, or, you know, in Baltimore where I got sober, it was the Chip House, where there were a lot of meetings, and then there were bunks upstairs for people to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an important, it's an important avenue. Some just come for the beans, as Bill did sometimes to the mission.
Lola was singing your praises back in February, March, weren't you, Lola?
Yes, I was, and it panned out, didn't it, David?
100%, absolutely. Didn't doubt you. So thank you very much, Lola. I love the also, if no one else is coming, I love the images you showed tonight of the Oxford group, and you also showed the meeting it's the first time seeing the inside of a meeting in the mission. Thank you for that. And then I love the comparison you showed then as well between the two. Whereas AA for me is, as you rightly say, is a combination of sort of a combination of both of them. So thank you for that, Tom.
Yeah.
Patrick, you want? Oh, there we go. Andy's coming in.
Hi, Andy from Birmingham, UK.
Hello, Andy.
Brummy. Hi, I just want to say I'm really grateful that JS put his shares on YouTube about history of AI, because that was where I got my history from before I found this meeting. But you mentioned like you mentioned like the four absolutes of the Oxford group.
Yeah.
How did they come about in the Oxford group? You mentioned, like, was it Rufus Jones, the Principles of Jesus?
It was Robert Spear.
Oh, right.
And they're in the book, The Principle of Jesus. And it was just a book that the early members of the Oxford group picked up. He was a speaker with them. But he had his own ministry. and they pulled those into the Oxford Group teachings.
And the financier, sorry, Andy, were you finished? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying thank you. Thanks.
The financier, you said, of Calvary Mission, I've been looking it up. C. Vanderbilt, is that right? C. Vanderbilt?
So Cornelius Vanderbilt, he funded the St. Bartholomew's mission. And St. Bartholomew's mission was where Henry Hadley went. So that's S.H. Hadley's brother started that mission. And he went there after Avenue A mission.
Right. No. I get that. Just joining up a couple of dots. It's fantastic.
And the St. Bart's, there's still I was in New York City for a while, and there's still a bunch of meetings in St. Bart's Church.
Let's jump in on, when we jump in on Mr. O'D, Patrick O'D, will we ask Patrick to come in? Thank you, Patrick.
There we are. Thank you very much, Tom. No, that Calvary Church, that was the church of the Roosevelts. I mean, all the money was down around that area back in the day, and then they moved uptown. So and missions were big. Missions were big throughout the country. Chicago, the Pacific missions, that was how people, particularly after the Civil War, they were quite common, and they were duplicates all over the country. And some of them pushed for abstinence, the Salvation Army wasn't really tolerant of people drinking in their facilities. Mm-hmm. That was one of that just assumed that you would stop drinking. So the missions were there all over. So there is nothing new. I mean, they had friendly brothers and friendly visitors and all different types of stuff that was going on. So it's I've always felt that that's where the core was, and we learned from there. It is the language of mankind helping one's brother. So not much else from me.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, if no one else want to come in, we can have the meeting after the meeting. I want to salute to Gloria. Nice to see you, Gloria. You are in the different location. We'll have a chat with you shortly. Tom, we're going to pencil you in for some other time, and we want to get we want to squeeze as much as we can out of you, sir. Yeah, we look forward to that. So what we do traditionally here is we turn it back to you to close in the manner of your choosing, whichever way you feel free to.
All right. How about we go to the 7th step prayer?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. My Creator, I am now
willing that you should have all of me,
good and bad.
Good and bad.
Now remove from me every
single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your duties.
Amen.
May I do thy will always.
Thank you, Susie. And once more, let's hear it for Tom Finnegan for all that endeavour, all the heavy lifting he's done for us. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's brilliant.
Yeah, beautiful.
And we will stop the recording at that point in the proceedings.